One Saturday night later that spring, I drove up to Saluda for a visit with my parents. As I wheeled down the hall toward their bedroom, my mother went ahead to tell Father that I was there, and I heard him excitedly call my name as he came out to meet me. When I reached to take his outstretched hand, his face suddenly contorted. For a moment, he stood motionless in front of me while his head jerked spasmodically. Mother realized immediately that he was having a stroke, and we managed to ease him into the chair. But all animation had gone out of his face, and a thin line of spittle formed in the corner of his mouth and made its way down his chin. After several minutes, the episode passed, but his head lay heavily against his shoulder as he sat slumped in the chair, and we stood him up against, then moved him into his bed. He urinated helplessly on the floor. After we got him into bed, he seemed to rest easily, either because he had lost consciousness or because the warring forces in his head had completely exhausted him. And Mother called the family doctor while I stood watch. This stroke stripped him away of his last vestiges of dignity. When I saw him again several days later, he did not recognize me. He was incontinent and had become verbally abusive to most of the staff on the ward. As with previous strokes, his physical impairment was not as great as was the change to his faculties. But he now took short, hesitant steps, and he was frail, sallow-looking, and oddly bent at the waist when he stood. When I entered the room and moved toward him to kiss his cheek, he became convinced that I was trying to run him down with my wheelchair, and he climbed onto his bed and curled up into a ball to shut me out. For an hour I tried to communicate with him, but when I left his room, it was obvious that my visit had been meaningless to him, and that I would never hear him call my name again, as he had only moments before this last terrible stroke. And at this point, they're trying to decide if they're going to keep him at home, which obviously he's at a point health-wise where he can't stay at home anymore, and they need to make a decision, and someone's got to make that decision, and the decision falls on Lewis Jr. I felt that by committing my father, I would be turning my back on the only man whose love for me had been boundless and unqualified, but in the end, I realized that I had no real choice. When I signed the paperwork to have him transferred to the Hampton, Virginia VA hospital, I used my left hand to steady my right and keep it from shaking. My decision, though time has proved it wise, was among the hardest I ever had to make. And he goes to visit him, and the visits are just, it's more of the same. After several more such visits, I began to wish the end would come. And as his deterioration quickened through the spring and summer, it began to appear that my wish would soon be granted.